books, The Washington Post, and others. Early Work is his first novel. His story collection, Bad Feelings, will be published in 2020. And then next, after that, will be Alicia Mountain, and Alicia Mountain received her MFA here at the University of Montana in Missoula. She's currently attending the PhD program at the University of Denver. Her work has been published or is forthcoming in, I think I was probably not supposed to say this, but okay, cool. Please, Barrow Street, Witness, Spillway, Lit, the Southampton Review, and elsewhere. Her first book, High Ground Coward, won the 2017 Iowa Poetry Prize and is on sale and back. So let's welcome Andrew and Alicia.
Thank you. Wow. It's really fun to be here. I was also an MFA graduate of the program, and I failed to put it in my biography. But I'm extremely proud to have been. Can you hear me? Yeah? Pretty good? I'm extremely proud to have been a part of this program, and it's just been so nice to be back in town. And I also feel for y'all in the midst of this chaos at the university, and I mourn the loss of the Indy, and I love this city, and I want it to continue to thrive, and so I hope we can find ways to keep it weird and interesting and independent and not totally fucked up. But I know you guys are not the problem. I want to read a little section of this book. So this is my first novel, and it's very much concerned with the process of becoming a writer and becoming the person that you want to be, which is a long, slow process that sometimes never comes to fruition. And for the main character, the narrator of this book, he is a little bit lost in his quest, in large part because he's not a very generous person to other people, not to be moralistic about it. But in this scene, so he's having an affair with this woman, Leslie, who's a writer. And in this scene, Leslie's fiance has come to town. They're living in Charlottesville, and they think it's a good idea, he and his girlfriend and she and her fiance, to all have dinner together. And so the narrator and Leslie know that they're having an affair, but the other two do not. So, problems deeply buried might arise. And I've insisted because, and this was like something I learned from David Gates, to continue to line edit your book long after it's been published. So if I stumble, it's because I'm changing things either on the fly or have recently cut lines that I don't like. So, Brian, Leslie's fiance, was coming to visit. Julia and I had foolishly committed to having dinner with the two of them on his second night in town at the fancy tapas restaurant. Leslie claimed it was essential that we meet each other. She talked about me too much to him, and he needed to see in person that I wasn't a threat. This very nearly made sense. Every time Leslie talked about Brian, I felt depression gnaw into me. In the days between Kenny's return and Brian's arrival, I spent a lot of time listening to the Sonic Youth albums from their scary period, Sister, Evol, songs about killing and being very nervous. They sounded like traveling on an interstate bus at night. Julia was used to me falling into periods of shallow darkness. She made sure I wasn't contemplating imminent self-harm and let me be. When the day of our big dinner arrived, I'd been fully transformed into a tightened muscle of absolute tension, barely able to communicate even with myself. At 3 o'clock, I got very stoned and drank whiskey and ice from a jumbo plastic cup. When Julia came home at 6, I was a charming blend of catatonia and sentiment. I crooned about how I loved her while she encouraged me to shower. Once I did that, she wouldn't shut up about me putting on clothes like there was some big rush. Apparently we were half an hour late for dinner. My carefully selected outfit proved compromised by obvious stains and missing buttons, so I changed and stumbled out the door in whatever, wrinkled jeans and a campfire-reeking lumberjack fleece with nothing underneath it. Julia drove. "I'm glad to see you're feeling better," she said. "What will we eat?" I said. "You never know what they'll have. That's the thing about this place, you just never know." She paused and made the surprising choice not to scream at me. I would have screamed at me. "I got a poem accepted today," she said, "by a good place." "Holy shit," I yelled, "that's amazing, where?" She named the place. I yelled some more. "It's really good for me," she continued calmly. "Damn right," I said. "Now we've got something to celebrate." "Right, you can finally break your abstemious vigil." "Shake 'em, bake 'em, abstemium sigil," I said. That's just nonsense. I cranked up the college radio station, which was playing a harpsichord song from the Renaissance or something, waved my arms around like it was a party jam in a prom limo. Julia switched it to the actual hit station, which was playing Taylor Swift, and we sang along to her song about Starbucks. By the time we parked, I was better spirited and a little closer to sober. "Oh, I hope they have that squid thing," Julia said, finally getting into it. "With the sauce?" "They fucking better," I said. The restaurant's defining feature was that it had many more seats outside than inside, the tables sprawled across a wide patch of concrete and corralled by a severe metal fence. I spotted Leslie at a table right in the middle of the cluster, sitting next to a benign-looking fellow with a beard. I pointed them out to Julia and we floated over. I felt like I was walking too close to the other diners, like I was practically running my fingers through their food, though they didn't seem to notice. Leslie and her man stood when we reached them. "Guys, this is Brian," she said. I looked him in the eye and shook his hand. "Peter," I said, "great to finally encounter you." "Same, man," he said. He was a little pudgier than I expected him to be, pudgier than me, thank God, but he had the reedy, mellow voice of a smaller guy. "I've heard you guys are the picks of the litter." "You shouldn't pick at litter," I said. "It gets you sick." She's a doctor. "I can take care of any medical situations you may experience," Julia said. Jockey bump, fox itch, metaplasmosis. "Great," he said uncertainly. We sat down and Julia apologized for our being so late. "No worries," Leslie said. "We're still trying to catch up anyway." "We were busy celebrating Julia's big publication news," I said. "We're going to need some cocktails very quickly." "I just got a random poem accepted," Julia said. "It's not that big a deal." "A doctor and a poet, huh?" Brian said. "That's awesome. Do you write poems about, like, your experiences as a doctor?" "Sure, sometimes," Julia said brightly. "I hear you write some too, about food?" "When I have time," Brian said, "which isn't that much right now, unfortunately. It sucks when real life gets in the way." "Gotta avoid life," I said. "Having money helps, doesn't it?" Leslie said. She was referring to the fact that I was a spoiled child. She studied my face, sending a message. I ordered martinis from Kelly, a waitress 3 years out of the local MFA program. She wrote short stories about girls turning into butterflies, boyfriends revealed as Draculas, sea otters with charisma. "Do you have that squid thing?" I said. There's an octopus dish on the menu," she said. "Why don't you look at the menu while I get your drinks?" Her hostility was acceptable, because I remembered in that instant she'd overheard me talking shit about her at a reading last year. "We marked a couple of things on the menu that looked good, but we're easy," Brian said. "This place looks really great." The menus were little pieces of paper, checklist style, designed to get you to order 100 small plates for fear of missing out. Everything sounded good, but the secret was that a quarter of the things were just steamed vegetables with some salt on them. I tried to look at my scrap of menu, but it was dark and my vision was terrible. Plus, I didn't have the attention span right then. I pushed mine over to Julia, and she neatly placed it under hers in understanding. "Does everyone eat everything?" Julia said. "I'm not super big on red meat," Brian said. "Well, unless it's locally sourced, right?" Leslie said. "I wasn't going to say that," Brian said. "The new people don't need to know what a weenie I am." "They're not new to me, darling," Leslie said. She was pointedly not looking in my direction. Our drinks arrived, and Kelly gathered up the scribbled-on menus. "Wait, did you guys finish figuring out what you wanted?" I said. Leslie looked confused. Kelly exasperated. "Whatever comes, we'll eat it," Julia said. "Well, cheers," I said when the waitress had walked away, "to everybody being in the same place." We all banged glasses, and no one commented on the paltriness of the stated occasion. Well, so how's your local food hub, I said. Isn't that where you work? You know, Brian said, you do your best. Non-local is always cheaper, and people like it better because it's full of delicious chemicals, right? You kind of start to wonder how much it matters when the FDA keeps being like, it's fine, everyone, enjoy the chemicals. You're all going to die from opioid overdose anyway. That's the most pessimistic thing I've ever heard you say, Leslie said. He shrugged and took a sip of his beer. I might need to get out of Texas, he said. There was a pause as Julia and I searched for a way to continue that line of thought without stepping in it, read their plans for marriage and therefore joint resettlement or possible forfeit thereof of one particular party, Leslie. Have you been getting stuff down out here? Julia said to Leslie. Been writing a little bit, Leslie said, betraying nothing. Reading a lot, actually. Finished that Cormac McCarthy I stole from you guys. Side note, maybe he's actually terrible. And now on to James Welch. He's a big deal in Missoula. I love that she used to live in Missoula. It's just a coincidence. He's a big deal in Missoula. I love his first two books, but this one's harder to get into. I want to read The Executioner's Song, Julia said. Peter won't stop talking about it. Oh yeah, Leslie said. I've read parts of it. Need to give it a full chance. It's worth it, I said. Has anyone here read the book about the hawk? Said Brian. I hear that's amazing. T.H. White already did it, Julia said. I think it's kind of about T.H. White, Brian said. So why bother, Julia said, more pointed now. It seems like everybody wants to make me read and see shit that's just a lamer version of something that already exists. Like, why do I need to see a movie where people pretend to be NWA when I can just watch Fuck the Police on YouTube, you know? I like to see how things get interpreted, Brian said, really thinking it through. You want to know what the contemporary take is, to be a part of the conversation. That's what Peter says when he wants to watch the Oscars, Julia said. But it's like, if everybody just rejected this shit, there wouldn't have to be a conversation, you know? The conversation is us. Well, is it better to be solipsistic, Leslie said? Like, my friend Edward refuses to read any newspaper articles about the kids who do the mass shootings because he doesn't want to give them the attention. And it's like, dude, they're not going to stop covering shit people want to read about just because you don't want to read about it. But if everybody decided to stop, then it would make a difference, Julia said. Like voting. It's exactly like voting, Leslie said. It's completely irrational activity. If you, Julia, decided to not pay any attention to who was running for president and didn't vote ever again in your life, it would make not a whit of difference, period. If I did that, it would signal some drastic shift in generational priorities. And it would be reflective of a changed culture, Julia said, similar to if everyone stopped reading about mass shooters. Right, but it wouldn't have affected the change, Leslie said. That's the difference. Leslie had a pugilistic squint I hadn't registered before, a desire to curb stomp Julia on intellectual grounds. The debate had ceased to have any basis in concrete reality, but there was a sense of there being something real in the balance, a way of seeing the world vindicated or proven insufficient. This was, of course, over a year before we found ourselves being tear-gassed with some regularity on something less than intellectual grounds. It turns out it doesn't get more concrete than pavement. All I'm saying, Julia said with finality, is that I'd rather take an active choice in the way I consume things. That, for me, is a way of feeling less co-opted, even if it's basically a delusion. If I can ignore certain things, they can basically cease to exist. I mean, for sure, Leslie said. Our first batch of food arrived shortly thereafter, 3 tiny plates of scattered leavings. Luckily, we ordered a million more things. I got another drink and thought almost exclusively about Brian fucking Leslie, the details of the act itself, and also the barbarity of it in principle. The third time Brian complained about Texas, I said, why don't you move here, man, or somewhere? Leslie gave me the ghost of a scowl, and I put my attention on Brian, who was staring down at his mushrooms, or whatever he'd scooped lately. We'll see, he said deliberately. Everything's a little up in the air at the moment, location-wise. It's not like I'm planning to stay here anyway, Leslie said. It's just my little country retreat. Yeah, moving forward's the hard part, Julia muttered. I like the South, Brian said. The music, the attitude. There's some farms. I don't mind that it's a little slow. I'm just not a big fish, small pond kind of person, I said. I prefer to be ravaged by stimuli. How much have you had to drink, Leslie said. As much as necessary, I said, to get through this. I mean, to get through this life. Baby. I felt a charge of recognition from Julia, the way she immediately put some food in her mouth instead of laughing or chiding me. The food finally stopped coming and Kelly brought us a check, unbidden. Do you care about basketball? I said to Brian. There was an important West Coast playoff game that night. Yeah, I've been checking my phone to see if the game started, he said. Pretty invested in Steph Curry, like everybody. Well, shit, I said. You want to watch it at a bar or something? He looked at Leslie like a child up past his bedtime, as I'd hoped he would. I actually did want to watch the game, but I also wanted to delay and possibly prevent him from having a good night with Leslie. I was willing to put myself in the way of his company in order to take her out of it. Sacrifice is what Americans think love is. Do what you'd like, Leslie said in a good approximation of neutrality. I'll take a bath, get some writing done. Unless you want to do something, Julia? Or do you want to watch the game too? No, I turn into a pumpkin pretty soon, Julia said. And I really don't care about basketball, even less than I care about the other ones. And there's some logistics, but then we get to... Julia paid our half of the bill with her credit card. I handed her a crumpled mess of 1s and 5s from my pocket. I couldn't see what she was leaving as a tip, possibly because she was intentionally shielding the receipt from me. I looked up and found Leslie's eyes fixed on me as Brian did something on his phone. She looked very sad. It probably wasn't great that I was essentially forcing her and Julia to share a car home while I watched basketball with her fiancé. When Leslie sensed Brian's attention returning, she broke eye contact with me and smiled blandly in his direction. The fact that I felt fully superior to him didn't do as much as I would have liked to quiet the panic rising continuously in me. My body was sure it was losing her, and it demanded booze in compensation. Please be good, Julia said when we got up to leave. You too, I said. I really don't feel like visiting the jail or the hospital tonight. Hey, me neither, I said. I'll be forcing myself on you in the dark before you know it. Forcing yourself on the couch is more like it. Good night, Leslie said, waving and opening the front door of her car. Take care of my boy. He's not built for too much poison. I'll leave it there.
So luckily this is a wireless microphone because I'm going to fumble in my backpack for a moment. But while I do, I'll say I'm so excited about Andrew's book. That snippet of a tapas experience, I feel like speaks to a lot of young adulthood.
It's generational.
Yeah. I decided that I wanted to read a poem that I wrote yesterday, and so it's in here, in this machine. And another beautiful moment that happened while Andrew was reading, a bug landed on his book, and it stayed there for a little while, and only I could see it. I'm happy to be back in Missoula. I'm happy to be under skylights in this beautiful space. It's so nice. It's my first time in this space. Let's start with this new poem. Let's find this new poem. It's called Rewinding the Lesbian Sex Scene on a Flight from Denver. There were years I feigned sleep to close the eyes of desire. Years I tried to see truth only in periphery. Years I tried to look anywhere else. The entangled couple beside me, their sock feet, the cloud caught in their small view of the open sky, wisping itself apart. There were years I stayed a satellite far above the earth. I am still looking over my shoulder for whoever has whispered my shame to me. I am watching them walk down the aisle. I am trying to keep my elbows and knees out of their way. I am reclining my seat every inch of unconfinement it will yield, which is not much. So I am held close to this reflection. Spit-slick lips and hands in hair and reaching inside and what I know well, head out of the frame. My gaze held unbroken by their bodies. Who said you can't drag your finger back across the screen of what you want? Who said you can't do it over again and again? Who said you can't ask for more? Who guilted my fingerprints into anything but a caress smudged across our surface? Whoever you are, whoever you were, look over my shoulder. Watch me fall in love, seeing myself in economy, in the thin air, seatbelt at my waist, like I am something to protect for this duration, like her hands on my hips, pulling.
Cool. Wow.
Thank you. I like it when people make noise when I read.
It's not making us fall in love.
And then I'm not the only one making noise, and that's nice. I'm going to read a bunch of Montana poems because here we are. Hawk like a steeple. Sitting at the crest of Waterworks Hill, we decided we'd never get married. I spread my arms to say, just this. You'd already left every home for me. It was the most Quaker wedding, simple, you and me in our coats, looking south over a new April stranger town. Held a branch behind your back like a bone, 8 strands of each other's hair, no ring or witness, rainless sky. Our mothers want us to be mothers, and your father who has been so dead is not dead to me. I tell him quietly that I won't have you be anyone's wife. Silence can't help but sing the coal trains in their couplings through the valley. Does anyone live in East Missoula? Or just regular Missoula? East Missoula. Cool. All right, it's not regular. Well, no offense to emo. A year or two. I want a very quiet, moneyed pain. Not to be borrowing enough for bail and waiting for the tow pound attendant to unlock the gate. He suggests you stop by a gas station to get rid of the empties before you get pulled over again. But you didn't get pulled over in the first place. If we get out of East Missoula in the next year or two, I'll give my anger over to self-help and sweepstakes. I'll kick the ass of that boyfriend that you're far too good for, and then take up Zumba and Pilates. I won't talk about getting dumped in a trailer park anymore, begging. I will lament that my grave plot is not in the shade, that my daughter's training wheels are loose and rattling, that the cat has a cancerous growth just beneath its jaw. Some dark July when the tomatoes in my overwatered garden split open, only then will I blame myself, wonder if I ever deserved organic anything. I will fall to my knees and break whatever delicate chain I've worn around my neck for years. I will think of us at 25, everyone we know swimming in desire and resentment. How did we make it out? How will things have gone just right enough that the godforsaken 4 a.m. phone call can't be for me? These poems are also all like really intense and kind of downers, which is our state. It's our state of emergency. I think people should vote. Do you think people should vote? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, vote. Yeah.
Not so many times we get in trouble.
Right, exactly.
But like the appropriate number of
Yeah, like maybe don't read the articles about the serial killers or about the child murderers, but do keep voting, please.
For one party.
Yeah, yeah, don't vote like an idiot. It's a weird day. We're gonna go to a fun poem instead of that one that I had marked. Okay, here's one that's pretty okay. Some days I want to use muggle as a slur. I want you are not magic to hold in it the kind of sting that burns all morning. There's a way that someone who's never been in a fist fight kind of wants that. But what the city is good for, remembering the one climbable willow still mermaiding through the park at dusk. The lifetime membership can be such a rip-off, but it just really depends. And at some point, that sucker of a stormtrooper must have realized those were the droids he was looking for. And then what? A gaslight purpling the path. The swim-up bartender calls it a Miami Vice. Half pina colada, half daiquiri swirl. The heroic part is that inside-out underwear still works. This is no embarrassment. The Morse code click of the burner before it lights. Whole milk hot chocolate, not for an occasion, just to drink. It turns out the 40-degree river of alpine runoff is pleasure incarnate, and she doesn't care if you strip down or not. If you put your face in, she's gonna keep running. Get someone to touch your nerve endings. With better eyes, you can see the loose balloons even longer. Let's read. Remember driving to Salt Lake City. Remember driving to Salt Lake City in the night in January in my Volvo, 88 Volvo, the love of my life, through craters of the moon and Monida, which is the front half of Montana and the front half of Idaho put together, permanent population of 2. Past the Continental Divide, which is how NPR reports the weather here. Winds east of the Continental Divide, west of the Divide warmer. How I fell over stretching my butt muscles in the gas station bathroom. How the brother-in-law we went to see is no longer your brother. How I ask you now to tell me long distance, I am still family. The sun came up in Utah with your eyes closed. The sun came up far from anyone's home. Frost fields and red hills, snow tires and road salt, hawk like a steeple. You remember waking up in Salt Lake City. You remember me undoing your seatbelt in the driveway, how there was no undoing then. Let's read a poem about the good food store. And about, like, small town drama. Solitary tasting. At the grocery, I mistake you for a twin of you, with bare arms cold in the dairy. I know who you cook dinner for. I know what they like to eat. And some tower of melons, some cereal box wall in me denies a cartful for them. A trending piece told me my life would never be the same, knowing the filigree of flat parsley points more sharply than cilantro's curve. What absent difference now that I know. Still, if you hand me a yam and hand me a sweet potato, all you have made is a thief. The longer I undiscern your body, like an eclipse watched in a shoebox, the more it seems as if this twin of you would also press me against the kitchen counter, borrow my shirt for an interview, betray very little to the house guests, grow something red and sweet and bitter in the garden. The twin of you, who is becoming more the real you, turns away, leans the cart into motion. A manager announces a cold cut special. An automated mist crisps the vegetables. This is a poem called Spit Valve Hello. The late evening ash of forest fire dandruffs the whole mingling backyard. And even at introduction, I can't meet anyone new. Two people named Mackenzie. Lita with the eyes and posture of someone cruel from college. Madison or Morgan, as blonde as Amora that I used to know, with small teeth, both of them. I imagine holding a handful of teeth, like smooth white pills or beads, rolling them through my fingers, some nervous monk with a rosary. A guy with his shirt on inside out speaks at me about himself, while I try to count the number of teeth in my mouth by touching my tongue to the back of each one. Inside my mouth, I'm in 8th grade. When they took off my braces, I played the trumpet a little better, but only a little. They gave the surface of my teeth back to me, slick, almost slimy, having been away for years. It feels like it's really fall. And I was talking to Robert, and Robert said that was just last night that it started being fall here. But it feels, I feel it. So the winter's just literally coming. I'm not trying to make a Game of Thrones joke. The smallest thaw. During the bleak week that straddled November and December, I became reliant on potting soil. I kept 40 pounds in my trunk as a more hopeful sandbag. When that weight was not enough, and my tires, even with their studs, spun like a stomping bull at slaughter, I cut the thing open and shook clean soil into the white piled street. I left a bottle of red wine in the trunk overnight, not thinking. With the expansive cold, the cork crawled out through the foil. Wine seeped into the dirt that spilled from the gutted bag. The rest froze solid, sideways, a phantom ship in a bottle. Driving to work, the smell of dirt said, "You are not going to the rented office clinic. You are going to your grandfather's field." This wasn't true, but after my clients, I fishtailed my way to the first farm I could find, a Montana tundra farm, outside of town, quiet, well chewed at by two swollen goats. I tromped out to a break in the snow where a barn had been razed to its foundation and crouched by the iced-over ground for a while. When the unwelcome snow in my boots began to melt against my pale ankles, I stood and turned to walk back. I opened the trunk, put my hands into that dark. My fists grabbed on as if it was something that could hold me. I'll just read a couple more, and then we can chat or ask questions or sign books. Thanks to Cut Bank for helping to sponsor this, and the Pride Foundation, and to all of our volunteers and organizers of the book festival. It was such a thrill to go through the schedule and just like see a lot of events and panels that I want to go to. I loaded up my calendar for the rest of the weekend, so I'm really excited about that. And Come say hi. Let's hang out. This is called What I Loathe in Others, I Like in You. On the bedroom floor of fondness, face down like a boy's skin rug, if I was one, carpet parted my face bones in bad, rough tufts. This is an adult moment, in ways prostrate. You and the nosebleeds can't see, but trust that this breath against the earth pull moves just enough to feel the undone alloy button of my jeans against what bone is there. The adult part would have been sleep hungry, or having not sent the text about tequila, doing modified push-ups on a Sunday afternoon, knowing how none of this is worth mention. Instead, immodestly seeking some homely cause for a clap on the back or a towel snap, cut nails just skimming where I cannot reach, until under my shirt is everywhere electric. And then lying turned to standing, when I wanted to stop saying I so much. I thought so cleverly of the seeing parts, how I break every gaze that tries to hold me, where my nose breaks the surface of Narcissus Pond. You who put your feet to our friendship, or strip your clothes to the floor of it solitary, you have accounted for my failing and drawn mustaches on my self-serious sleep, forgiven and forgiven about me. And there's another poem that's not in the book, but that's the Missoulaist poem about moving away from Missoula, which is an impossible thing, and coming back for a visit, which is what I'm doing now. It's called Self-Same River Thrice. Bought the kind of discount flight where you don't even bring a carry-on, thinking you'll arrive to everything you left behind. How the lady at Bargain Corner said that at least once a week, someone comes in to buy back what they've given away. Sometimes it's there, and sometimes it isn't, and sometimes they don't want to pay. Walked past the old house and couldn't lift my eyes to it. Flicked what glowing butt of home I had held as an ember to the ground, worked it into the grass I used to mow. Down by the water, got carried away thinking of the spring that a man eating a driver's seat burrito in a Taco John's parking lot left his life and his truck in reverse. The whole diesel carapace rolled backwards into the river so high it drowned and tumbled them down to the minor league field. The season hadn't started yet. The sand was still uncombed. Stepped over and over into the pool of guts I spilled before women as offering, poking around in the offal of myself. Here, my paternal discontent. Here, my queer Tupperware childhood. Here, the meteor shower that spangles my birthnight, and how I like to be alone from the light pollution when it falls. Gathering this up, soupy in my arms. It's for you. This is all for you. It was, it still is, slipping heavy out of grasp. A wet trout in a wet hand before it's knocked pocket knife dead. And the common wisdom is to end when people are clapping. But one more. Let's read one more, and then you can clap again. Forward falling daytime. At sunrise, I say, light, shut up. Reset the dashboard clock while swerving. A travel mug rolling in the passenger footwell that was not, it turns out, spill-proof. Boulders in the rear view like some molecular rushing outran its invasive historic wearing away, pitted weed against parasite and hollowed out my placeless worry. Left my initials on a tabletop in Bozeman, scratched a rude mountain from a borrowed knife. Sunrise road so steep the car curses me rhythmically. Don't return my mother's calls in full, just that I am with my 2 friends at the edge of a mine. Don't name them because I am far away from generosity. In general, things are fine. The pit says hi. Gas is still cheap, and I'm afraid I won't be famous. Cheesy cracker aftertaste stuck in my molars. What if I am known for nothing but forgetting to floss? We talk through a script about the end of humanity, reclamation and prairie grasses 9 feet tall. Possibility and integrity, both a lessness, like towns called Phosphate, Racetrack, Anaconda, Opportunity. I want us to disappear, but all together so we won't be alone. Thank you. I think we have time for questions, and Andrew will probably answer questions, or the 2 of us can
Why don't you
talk
ask
about
each
things.
other? Why don't you ask each other one question?
That's a great request. I was wondering, within this work of fiction, a novel that you've written, like, what is it like to distinguish yourself from the characters therein?
Yeah, I like that form of the question much better than the one I've gotten a bunch, which is like, how much of this is true? Which, is like the fiction writer's nightmare. Because I think your question gets much closer to the heart of something I really do think about, and especially honestly, like today and in recent times, like it's been feeling so emotionally tenuous just to be out in the world, and this book is a very spiky book. It's a very, I think it's a funny book, but it's also like, it's like me with the meanness turned up a bunch of degrees. And so I sometimes, and I honestly, if you read the published version, I'm cutting lines left and right. Partly, I'm softening it, and not out of self-censorship, but because like I am just not in the mood for some of the nastiness of it. And I'm really proud of the book, and I think like the character is real because of that hardness and that harshness. But at the same time, he's not me, and it's a very like sort of faux autobiographical novel, and the characters in the book are very much like people I know in some ways, but the way that the narrator feels about them isn't necessarily the way I do, and the way that they act is not the way they would act in real life. So it's kind of tricky, and I think like, in a room full of writers and literary people, everyone understands that, but like not everyone, like my partner's grandmother doesn't understand that at all, not in the least, and she's very angry. Like I don't know if I can like talk to her honestly. It's like caused a rift in the family. So I don't know. But if it's not too tacky to turn that slightly to you about the poet eye, because Laura and I once both reviewed a book about William Carlos Williams in which the author kept saying, like, well, Williams, when he writes this poem about cheating on his wife, this is what he meant. And it felt bogus, even if he really did do exactly what he described in the poem. It's like, this is a different space, or at least that's how I've conceived of it. But how do you conceive of the eye in your poetry?
Excellent question. I think that in my work, at least in this collection, I think the speakers there are like a handful of different speakers that are versions of myself, which maybe is a bit of what you're speaking to. Like, there's the self that is like cranky, or there's the self that's really like just joking around, or there's a self that is in one relationship or other relationships, or the self that chose, that didn't choose to be a poet, that is, is living a different life. And I feel like they all answer to the same name, and that's my name, but I think there are a bunch of Alicia Mountains running around in there.
You wouldn't want to be sworn to
Oh, yeah. Certainly not. I would not want to be sworn to what they think or what they do or how they act towards people that they love. But I think that I could be any of those people, or there are times or moments that I'm in those modes, though impermanently, I'd say. Yeah.
Why is it that almost all of the works that both of you guys read from were based off of sexual themes? Like, all except for the last poem, from what I understood, had basic ideas that surround the idea of sex.
You want to start?
I'll stall us here. I mean, my book is all about relationships and sex, and there are some pretty. This is either like an endorsement or the opposite, depending on your taste. But there's a bunch of sex scenes in the book, even. But I mean, to me, I feel like it's such a huge part of adult life, especially like young adult life, in my understanding of it. And it seems like an interesting thing to try to take seriously. I feel like maybe in contemporary discourse, sex is sometimes, it's like joked about or laughed off always, and it's like always, or it's extremely serious. But it's like one of the things that drives relationships, it drives friendships. It's a political thing, whether who you're having sex with and who's bothering you about it or not. And so I feel like it's just it's a subject that's always engaged me as a reader, without being prurient about it, or I'm sure slightly prurient about it. But to me, it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know. It's not a great answer. What do you get here?
I agree. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I think it's part of our lives in ways that more broadly culturally we might not be comfortable with, so it might stand out to hear just like sex being a normal part of life as depicted in creative work. But hopefully I think I'm probably having more sex than I'm writing about having sex. So I think that percentage-wise, yeah, of course it's going to be in the work, because it's part of my life in a way that I think I want to represent in the work that I make, and then to share with readers and audiences.
As a reader, we see many messages that we discover on ourselves, but what message do you want to deliver with your
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I think the question was something along the lines of readers will receive many different messages from the work, but the question asker is curious about what message we hope is received. Is that right? One second. I think in my work, in an interview there was a question, I'm not sure if it was exactly the same, but I remember my answer was something along the lines of I'm trying to build in this book a world without shame, or a world that moves through and beyond shame. So that feels important to me. I don't think that that's something I'm writing directly to in every poem, but trying to create a little universe where we can talk about anything or be anyone, and there's room to question that or to interrogate it, but not to shame it. So I think there are lots of different things that I hope come through in the work. Some of it's also just an interest in language or image, but the one that feels important to me today is about shame.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, I think in general, I've been as a teacher and a person who talks about books, I've been very resistant to the idea of a message, but of one message. But I think, I mean, I think what I hope people get out of the book is what I've gotten out of the books that I've loved, which is just like a sense of possibility created by literature, this like sort of other space you can inhabit and see how someone else's brain works. And to me, you know, literature's given me everything so much of what I have in my life, and just given me a place to be and a place to feel like myself. And I think that hopefully some people find that in this. One small thing in the book that I was trying to do was in this book, the like sort of, not to spoil anything, but like the secret hero of the book is the female writer whom the male narrator who's spending most of the book pining after. And I just, not that I'm the person to do this, but you know, all the women in the book are much more interesting characters, I think, than the men in the book. And to me, that was important to sort of like puncture this male narcissistic literary thing, of which I very much have partaken. But the book is trying very hard to be about how that is bullshit, and how there are perhaps other ways of being in the world besides a narcissistic male writer, even if it's the one that we are most, that we see the most frequently.
Is that Julia or Leslie or someone we did not hear from?
Both of them, but Leslie is really the star. And I wrote short stories with her as the main character that I published previously, and then she sort of migrated into this book as well.
It seems in a lot of fiction, especially young adult, that character flaws are simpler stuff, kind of like, oh, they're clumsy, or they're kind of nervous. How do you go about writing kind of a multi-dimensional character? Like, they have actual flaws that you would kind of, not that you would want to say so, but you would judge someone for having. How would you go about writing stuff like that?
Well, yeah, I always like my characters with flaws and with problems. You know, there's been this big debate in the literary world about like likability, and I always like the characters who are unlikable. But I think honestly, like on a craft level, making them funny helps. Like being funny helps. It helps like sort of take some of the sting out of characters who are unlikable, as people do in real life. You know, like sometimes you know, you self-deprecate. You find ways to sort of make those spiky, ugly parts of yourself a little bit more palatable to the world. And so I think that maybe helps. You can write a character who's mean or whatever, and if they, as long as they tell a joke every now and then, you can forgive them.
And in the passage that you read, I noticed humor both in the jokes that the narrator might have been cracking, but also in the way that he was described, even self-described. You know, I put on whatever. It's like, yeah, that's not necessarily likable, but it's a great lens through which for us to kind of make fun of them too.
Yeah, it's ironizing. I think ironizing the character is a thing that's hard, and that requires, I feel like when I'm teaching classes, when we talk about ironic distance, it can be a little bit complicated how we create it, but there has to be some way in which you're conveying to the reader that you see that you're like putting this through a lens rather than like advocating for what's on the page, which is like, you know, you can fuck it up, you know, you do end up with people misreading, and that's that.
As younger authors, is your work heavily or like less influenced by current cultural events that are happening?
Yeah, I think my work is definitely influenced by the world in which I live. I don't know if that's to a greater or lesser extent because of kind of where I am in my career and in my lifespan. I can't really imagine writing work, 40, 50 years from now that still wouldn't be engaging with a world in which I live that is a political world, that is a sociocultural world. That's all there is for me.
Yeah, and well, I mean, honestly, the passage I just read, that parenthetical about getting tear gassed, is like the one. It was the one line I added. I mean, I added a bunch to the book but like that was the line. I wrote an essay about this. I don't want to repeat myself. But there's like right after this book was finished before Trump was elected, essentially. Immediately after which, I was like, shoot, I need to like go in and like put the crisis in the book, and kind of did that, and it didn't really work. It didn't really make sense for the book as it existed. I mean, the book is about they're engaged with the world, but they're engaged with the world of 2015. But I think going forward, especially, it feels very hard not to. I mean, and everything is political. Everything you write is political, I think. But I don't believe in a politics-free space. I don't think, even though literature can provide a respite, it's not outside of politics.
It's interesting to have written a book before the election, and I think that for me, it will always be time-stamped in that way because it won a poetry prize and was accepted for publication before the election, and then was published a few months after the inauguration. And so although the pub date is 2017, the intensity of this current political moment is not in there in the way that it would be or will be in my next book. There are mentions of some racial awareness, definitely mentions of gender and sexuality, but nothing like the work that will come, I think. So I think I imagine I will look back on this book as, before versus an after.
Is work from my either inspired by or partly written in Montana, and I'm really, really happy to have that work between covers. What about you?
I'm working on like 2 manuscripts kind of simultaneously. I'm in a PhD program, and so I have to write a dissertation, which will be a new book of poetry. So that should be done in about a year, and then send it out to to presses. And right now I'm like doing a good amount of traveling and reading around the country. I think you're doing book toury things. So trying to share the work in our own voices is on the horizon too. And then what's next for all of us is that there is an MFA reading right after this in this space right now. Hang out, buy some books, and then stick around for Cut Bank presenting UM MFAers. I'm sure they're going to be great. Thank you so much for